Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everyone, it's Debbie, and I'm so excited to finally talk to my friend Dina Griffin today, sports nutritionist. We podcasted about 10 years ago. We started talking about metabolic efficiency testing. She used to work for Bob Seebehor, and fast forward 10 years, we're talking about metabolic efficiency in the fat-adapted athlete and the female athlete, how to fuel train and perform the female athlete based on your cycle, hormones. Ladies, we have menstrual cycles. Men might want to listen to this as well to understand why men are different than women. And Dr. Stacy Sims wrote a great book. We're going to dive into what we got from her book. But Dr. Stacy Sims' book called Roar is about how to match your food and fitness to your female physiology for optimum performance, great health, and strong, lean body for life. And there's lots of great takeaways that I will do a separate podcast with. So this is part 2. And part 1, I went into more of the notes that I took and takeaways. Dina is going to talk about the fueling part of it today. And then I'll talk to my friend Erin Carson, who's the big strength coach for these amazing professional triathletes in Boulder, Colorado. And she's also the owner of Rally Sport. But Dina also lives outside of Boulder, and she's going to talk about the nutrition part of it, because there's so much really to go into as we learn more about low carb training for endurance athletes. There's lots of information out there on keto for endurance athletes and keto for just fat loss, but not enough on about keto, low carb, and the endurance athlete, plus specifically the female athlete. A lot of the research, including the FASTER study, was done on men. And most of these studies, as Dr. Stacy Sims says in her book, that women, they say, are too complicated to do research studies on. So you have to remember when you're reading research studies that they're based on probably men. And you have to look at the age group. And if there's women in there, they're not going to take into account that we have hormones that fluctuate during the month if you're premenopausal. And there's 2 phases of a typical 28-day cycle. Is the follicular phase, days 1 to 14 are the low hormone phase, when you're more similar to a man and his hormones, but we have lower progesterone and estrogen in the first phase. And then days 15 to 28, the luteal phase of our female cycle, is when we have higher hormone phase. So we have higher levels of progesterone and estrogen. And so you'll learn all about that in Dr. Stacy Sims' book, Roar. It's more of the first few chapters we're going to talk about today, about hormones and how we need to take those into account when we're designing a training program for female athletes, and how we can tweak their performing, or rather their strength training and cardio type of training workouts for whatever sport they're training for based on that time of the month and their hormone levels. So we also, as Dina and I will talk about today, the nutrition part of it. And then Erin will talk about more the strength conditioning, the performance perspective for female athlete. But really looking at women versus men and how we're different than in our endurance, and how we react in higher altitude and heat and cold, how we recover, how we repair. And so there's all this information in her book, as well as, the strength training part of it. But really, it's an important book and concepts for female athletes to look at. I don't know necessarily, Dina might know more than I do, if this book was based on a fat adapted athlete or a typical athlete eating the high standard American diet and the high carb athletic diet that people usually have versus our listeners are mostly interested in the fat adaptation process, and you're probably already doing low carb, or you're curious about the low carb athlete. And what I post on Facebook, my low carb athlete page, and what I post on Instagram, low carb athlete as well, is different research and articles about all this. And as I focus on building my new business on coaching from a health perspective as a nutritional therapist and FDN practitioner, I'm looking at how to optimize your health at a cellular level to promote fat loss, performance gains. Of course, you want to improve your athletic performance, but also longevity. And I think we need to take all that into account for a female athlete versus male athlete. But also, I'm looking at investigating your chronic stressors. And those can be external stressors that you may or may not know about, and then your hidden internal stressors that are going to be more identified with the functional lab testing that we do in the FDN 3-step process. And we don't know what those internal stresses are unless you test. So you don't want to guess what's going on under your hood of your car. You want to test. So as I do 90-day coaching programs with my clients, part of it is working on their nutrition and exercise. Then we work towards their stress and their sleep and their digestion and their gut health, of course, mobility, movement, and hydration. And really important part of it is gratitude, happiness, reducing anxiety and working on being more grateful and positive attitude. And all that interplays with stressors, because emotional stressors can contribute to your stress load. Ali Miller had a great article I posted the other day on how women, keto works for a lot of people for health issues, but how low carbohydrate you go depends. And she didn't talk about if you're an athlete on top of being a stressed out female, but you have to take into account your total stress load, the allostatic stress, that anything too much, as we talk about nutritional therapy, is a beaker of stress. And if your beaker of stress is overfilling, you're going to have problems. And so when you go too low of carbohydrate for a female, as well as an endurance athlete, you could be causing more damage. You could be creating more stress. And I'll talk to Dina about that today, because I know we've talked a lot on social media posts saying it's bio-individual. Every one of you, we're all different. We don't have the same genetic makeup. We're not identical. So we're not going to follow an identical program. You need to listen to yourself, listen to how your body feels, and pay attention to that. Be intuitive on your nutrition and know when, okay, I feel good, and I know when I feel like crap, and my workout's awesome, or my workout was just a waste of time. So your body gives feedback if you stop and pay attention to those signals. You may need to adjust your macronutrients so you have energy instead of being too low of carbohydrate. So a lot of us do need more protein and fat, and I use in all my coaching programs, certifications I've taken, Paul Chek, nutritional therapy, FDN, they talk about bioindividuality and metabolic typing. And so I have my clients go to mtdiet.com and take a quiz, and we figure out if they're slow or fast oxidizer, parasympathetic or sympathetic or mixed. And we can get a lot of information from this. And then we use a diet check record to track how do you feel when you eat your meal. And so going back to stress, chronic stress, is that's kind of the main thing we're working on when we're doing our health coaching program as FDN practitioners, being a health detective and helping you identify your external and internal stressors. And I think going back to being too low carb, too much fasting, too long of intermittent fast, too frequently, can all accumulate to being too much stress that you already have. So if you're already stressed out, if you have HPA axis dysregulation, if you have hypothyroid issues, if you're already doing too much in life, living life as a race, doing an extended fast may be causing your body to feel like it's in stress mode, it's under emergency, under attack. Or if you're doing too low of carbohydrate, some people say it might be too much. All right, guys, I have my friend Dina on the show today to talk all about sports nutrition and the female athlete in our book review on Roar. So Dina, thanks for coming to talk to me finally after a couple years of not being able to see you and talk to you.
I know, Debbie, thank you for reconnecting and having me on your show. I've been following along, and I am so excited that you are bringing this topic more to light. And so I just wanted to say that before we dig in, even just with regard to highlighting this book and some of the things with regard to female athletes. So thank you for being a leader here in this.
Well, I think we both were talking, it started a couple months ago when you and I were both in some of the Facebook groups page for the fat adapted athlete or the keto endurance athlete or whatever group it was. And I think there's always something missing. And you listen, I know you, and we're probably reading things going, okay, everyone's jumping on the bandwagon to do keto based on the non-athletic world. And then there's all these people that are taking account that women, as Stacy Sims says, are not small men. And that we're like, okay, wait, what about bioindividuality? It's not one size fits all for all these people trying to do low carb, high fat, which, works for me. But how low is too low, and how much intermittent fasting is too much, and how women have female cycles, menstrual cycles, that we need to learn that things change as our hormones change. And we'll talk more about the high hormone phase and low hormone phase, but talk about your experience and how you got into doing her beta test program for the book Roar and Women Are Not Small Men program.
Yeah. Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, Dr. Stacy Sims, she has tons of credentials and things, but one of the leaders in sports science research, especially on the female athlete. So her new course, online course, Women Are Not Small Men, I was lucky to get into that first round of the course and be a part of it. And my interest does come from kind of what you were mentioning a minute ago, just like there's something missing, and it's not like any of this is brand new to me, that women are different than men and women athletes are different than men, but just uncovering more of the science. And that was really what I have been wanting to focus on more and more in the last, I'd say, 5 years, just seeing more female athletes, and in the sport of endurance, all of the endurance sport, just the growth of female participation. And as a nutritionist or dietitian, just how can I best serve these women? And you and I are both women, right? I know we're around the same age too, so just the forgotten athlete is our, getting into menopause years or peri-menopause, menopause, and beyond, just how, even just how women themselves are different from each other. And I could just keep going in that whole train of thought because it's so exciting.
Well, I don't think
but I'll pause there.
Think about it, though. Most people don't. They know, like, women have boobs and men have penises.
Right. Thank you for reminding me.
So men and women, that's our big differences, so we all follow the same strength training program and triathlon training or run schedule, just one size fits all, not even looking at, all right, women have this hormone cycle that changes and fluctuates during the month. Men do not. And so it's funny how it's like, why didn't we ever think of this years ago and pay attention to the study everyone talks about for low carb athletes, is that faster study. And no one really looked at, okay, you pointed it out one day, and then I started looking into it. I'm like, there was no females in that big test. And that's the only one test that's been done. And as Stacy says in her book, that women are too complicated to add in because you got to get all the females on the same cycle, which is probably almost nearly impossible to get everyone to start their menstrual cycle day one on February 17th. So
Right. It
it's
takes a
funny.
little more work. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's, I think, something that is beautiful that she's pointed out is that we can't, though, use that as an excuse anymore. There are ways to design research studies to include more women, especially in sport science, sport nutrition. You just have to do a little work behind it, but it's not that hard, right? I mean, it's doable. But
But
yeah, just you and me, I don't know your like coaches you had before and things, but when I started marathon running, decades ago now, like, no, my coach never asked me about my menstrual cycle. I never talked about being on the pill or symptoms or how this would affect my running schedule or recovery. Like, that was not a conversation.
mm-mm.
And that has to be a conversation now.
Yeah. So women athletes almost need a female coach to understand that, or a male coach to actually be open-minded to become, do her program, probably to learn more about the different phases that we go through and how our training, fueling, and performing is going to alter based on the hormone cycle. But before we dive deeper into what you got out of her program, the book, just wanted you to share that your background is a dietitian and you're more into sports nutrition and metabolic efficiency testing. For how many years have you done?
Yeah,
All that?
let's see, I've been a dietitian 13, going on 14 years. And the sport nutrition focus, I got into some clinical work right away and working with diabetes, but I would say the sport nutrition focus has been um, 11 or 12 of those 13, 14 years. And again, mostly endurance athletes.
But you did, and you still do, I think, a lot of metabolic efficiency testing on athletes.
The testing, that was about 7.5 years. I haven't done much testing here in the last year and a half due to some equipment access, but that's changing soon. So, but yeah, as far as the testing goes, and we can talk about that, I guess, as it pertains to other topics.
So what are your takeaways from that, merging with what you learned from Dr. Stacy Sims, like the first thing that was big ahas, like, all right, all this stuff I learned and testing all these female athletes and doing their nutrition, what have you kind of transformed in your head and the way of coaching your mindset since you've done all this, reading her book and doing her
Yeah. Well, I think some of it was in the works already, and her book was like, oh yeah, I'm seeing the light even more. Yeah. So like even when I did a lot of the metabolic efficiency testing with a metabolic cart, I didn't control for the woman's cycle. So that started towards the end of my testing, where what I mean is if you came in to do a test, I didn't ask you, were you in your, and let's say you were a menstruating woman not on an oral contraceptive. I didn't ask you, like, where are you in your menstrual cycle? Not realizing that could have an impact on the data I would see. So, in Stacy's book, she talks about, that we can, let's say our diet is pretty controlled for, we're not, changing our diet within a menstrual cycle. In the beginning of a menstrual cycle or a new menstrual cycle, our estrogen and progesterone are lower, right? So we're more like men in that first part of the menstrual cycle. We tend to burn more fat as our estrogen levels increase and progesterone increases in that higher hormone phase. So if I were to test a woman on let's say day 6 of the menstrual cycle versus day 22, depending on, if this is a woman who has regular menstrual cycles and is healthy in that regard, we could potentially see differences in fat oxidation rates. I did a couple of those tests on myself, And I saw a little bit of difference. Now, one could argue, is it really that important in the grand scheme? Like, what's the big difference between
Mhm.
low and high hormone phase? And I think that's something that has to be considered in the big picture, along with the other 100 variables,
Yeah.
considering who this person is, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what we always talk about, chronic stressors. When I did new leaf testing for 10 years before Lifetime Fitness bought them out, Mom was angry about that. I
Yeah.
could still be doing testing if it wasn't for them. But the metabolic testing, to do that on people now, it'd be so fun to, take into account their chronic external stressors that you can identify. And even if you could do the lab testing that I'm doing on their hidden internal stressors, then look at their menstrual cycle and look at their blood sugar levels, and
Sure.
totally see this picture of individuality and how we can create a program for someone based on all this data. And if you could test them 2 different times of the month during the follicular phase and the luteal phase, and then see the differences and compare, all right, here's how your training is going to be different. Days 1 to 14, and then days 15 to 28 in your high hormone phase, we're going to do more endurance training because you're more built your higher level to burn fat. And then we're going to do your HIIT training in the follicular phase because you're not going to be burning as much fat, right? And so you're going to
That's
be doing more
exactly
high intensity
right.
training to see more carb available.
And so I think that's where we come to a generalization now, even though, okay, women are not small men, but now we know that women are very different from women. I mean, that's not now we know, we've known that for a long time, but we're uncovering more of the science behind it, right? The unique aspects of physiology. Of course, then we have peri-menopause, menopause, post-menopause that changes the whole thing. But for right now, just talking about menstruating, healthy female athletes. I have been looking, Debbie, for a testing center that's not a research facility, but just a center like what you had and what I had formerly, where, like, is anyone doing this? Testing
Mm-hmm.
women in both parts of their menstrual cycle. I haven't found anyone yet. So, I mean, that would enable us as practitioners, coaches, nutritionists, the holistic practitioner to really fine tune that a little bit more and take another level of generalization out.
Mm-hmm.
If we could get to that level. So maybe there's someone out there doing it and I just haven't found them yet.
Well, Erin was supposed to be on the call. She owns Rally Sport. So we got to get her to buy the metabolic testing cart and make room for us.
That would be amazing. That would be
So
amazing. But
what do you feel
yeah,
like? Oh, go ahead. I'll
I
ask
was just
you.
going to point to what you're saying though, that shifting the training, and I know you'll talk more about that in your own podcast and then with Erin, shifting the programming or the type of training to work better with female physiology. That's ideal.
Yeah.
And maybe that makes, 5% difference. Maybe it makes for some women a 40% difference. I think it depends a bit on the level of athlete. We've got some pro female athletes like the soccer team, right? They went through some significant programming, adapting it to each woman's cycle.
Hmm.
And, they achieved greatness. So, I mean, I think it's so exciting to see or think about what's to come in terms of changing programming and then the nutrition with it.
So what was her, you did, but I keep seeing she's running like every 6 weeks. It's an online course that Dr. Stacy Sims offers too. It's called Women Are Not Small Men course. And so what are some things that you're allowed to share without, people should obviously do her program and buy her book, but what are some things that you think that are helpful to share with female athletes who are trying to lose fat weight and improve performance?
Gosh, I think one of the biggies is, let's see, just figuring out where you are as a woman in terms of your cycles. So if you're not in post-menopause, let's say you're before menopause years, is really, and you're not on an oral contraceptive, we could talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But tracking tracking your cycles, Debbie, is kind of like when we log our training. I mean, most of us as athletes, like we've got to go into Training Peaks and log our thing, or it auto uploads and we make comments. Same thing with menstrual cycle, is really starting to track like day one of period, flow, blood flow, as how's your mood, how does appetite change, all of these metrics, because that can really influence some of the fine tuning that we need to do with nutrition around training around the menstrual cycle.
So I'm just looking at Training Peaks. It'd be cool if I can talk to them. They're in Boulder, so you should go talk to them, but they should add on their metrics. I always think they should add all these things. Let's see on the metrics if you can track your cycle, because you have your weight, sleep, overall feeling, your steps, appetite, fatigue, injury, mood, motivation, body fat, your rest-wise score, sickness.
There is a menstruation. I think it's just like, I think it's there, but it's like just related to blood flow, I think, like light, medium, heavy, that kind of scale or ranking.
So what women need to do on Training Peaks, if they're using Training Peaks, which I think most of us, I use it for my athletes, and I am not even really coaching athletes anymore. It's just coaching people for performance and longevity based on their health. But I track their exercise on here and their metrics. And if you could add in your cycle, like say you started on, day one is whatever, but if you want your coach to help you better, maybe we should suggest like start using your whatever training program you're using and tracking your own cycle there instead of having, 10 different apps. I know there's apps that people want to go look at, free apps for tracking their menstrual cycle, like when you're trying to get pregnant.
Yeah.
That I once did that you can use and track that. But then if you could implement that into your workout schedule and nutrition training, you can figure out, all right, how I should eat.
And that's something I've been having my athletes do, even though I'm not a coach, I'm doing nutrition coaching, but I'm saying, you know what, do this for your coach who's scheduling your training, even though I may not agree with how your training is scheduled right now. Start tracking, how is your recovery? How, what is the length of your actual period, and what's the duration of your cycle, and how is that trending? Because that can tell us a lot about energy availability. Are you eating enough? Especially when you mention women who want fat loss and they want to do, keto or these long fasts. I like to talk about that with each person and learn where they're coming from and the why, and expectations and so forth. But that's something Dr. Sims talked a lot about in her program, and it's not really a secret, because I think she talks about this in the book too, is just the concern of, that prolonged catabolic state, just even after our overnight fast when we're sleeping and we wake up. And for athletes, female athletes that want to, knock out a 2-hour, 3-hour training session, fasted, and then they don't recover well nutritionally, and just that burden on the endocrine system that can occur pretty darn quickly, and it's not talked about, right? The research shows after 4 days of low energy availability, our endocrine system, like our thyroid and some other neuropeptides that control our hormonal balance, I'll just say that for lack of a better word, that can take a hit within 4 days.
Even if you're burning fat and ketones, people would say. So even if you are fasting and doing low carb eating, higher fat, and you're doing fasted workouts, because this is, I think, what we should dive into the rest of the show. This is the huge topic everyone has questions on those forums, and no one really has the answers because it depends. But if you're saying if people are fasting too long, that they are breaking their body down because you're in a catabolic state, But what if you are a fat adapted person? Because they say the longer you fast, you're burning ketones. The ketones will fuel your brain, and ketones and fat fuel you for your workouts. But when is it too much that it's becoming an additional chronic stress that's causing you to be catabolic, which means break down muscle instead of anabolic building you up? And you have that cortisol to DHA ratio, which is the balance of the hormones you want to have. Cortisol is breaking down, which is that chronic stressor hormone, and anabolic is DHEA that builds you up, which is why, we'll talk more with Erin about you need to lift heavy weights and not do all this chronic cardio long distance stuff is increasing your cortisol. So that's breaking us down. But fasted, intermittent fasting, low carb, are you not burning? Does it matter for fat adapted and we're already metabolically flexible? What's your thought?
I mean, I think that is one piece of the very large puzzle. But what is going on is that, in those forums, Debbie, that you and I keep an eye on, I mean, who of all of these women, and I'm not saying, a blanket statement that keto or fasting doesn't work for anyone or shouldn't be considered for some people. But remember, it's mostly like the clinical population where all this started. So we don't know a lot about female athletes, but I'm pretty certain that, no one is really tracking their own cortisol, DHEA levels, having their thyroid tested accurately before they begin all of their dietary changes on top of their endurance training. But I mean, luckily with someone like you, you're educating the importance of all of that, popping the hood, right, to look at all the diagnostic testing.
Don't guess. You don't know unless you test, is what I keep saying. And looking under the hood, we have no clue. I keep thinking lately, it'd be cool if we could just test our hormones like the blood sugar testing kit, or have the continuous glucose monitor in your arm that also tells you your hormone level at any time.
That would be amazing, and I bet it's coming someday.
Yeah,
hopefully we're not in the grave when it's here.
Yeah.
I think the thing is more like we're only looking at one piece when we read about like, well, I feel great in my fasted workout and I feel like I recovered well, but that's, like a subjective feeling, and over time is the question, like, what is this impact having, more on that longer term time frame. So that's where I get a little nervous with women who eventually want to be pregnant, or like doing all this fasted training. It may work fine in the beginning, right? But the longer term impact is something we just, there's some evidence that that's not a good idea. And I think people are in denial because they, want to assume we are just as resilient as men. That's not been shown. In fact, I wanted to mention one of the studies that Dr. Sims mentioned in her course, which showed that women actually, and I can send you the link too, but women actually experience more of the training adaptation in the fed state versus the fasted state. And this was in endurance athletes. So they looked at skeletal muscle changes, and I forget the study length of time, but men showed better response to training fasted, and women showed better response being fed prior to their training. So those are things we need to acknowledge at least.
That was a depressing thing I read in the book, that men will burn fat. I don't know where I got 20 pages of notes in my handwritten notes in my book, but 22 hours longer, and women are 2 hours. It's like, hey, you guys, you gotta, period. My takeaway though is what you're saying is, well, two things. One, that's what I keep trying to say to everyone. I have been broken since 2013. You still haven't seen me doing a marathon or an Ironman because I can't run without fatigue and slow pace and high heart rate. Just something is off. And that's part of my purpose of what I'm doing, is to help educate people before they get to be like me. But I keep stressing, I was doing metabolic efficiency training. I did maffetone training, that low heart rate, for back in, like, before anyone I was training racing, 2001, I started Ironmans, and I sort of fasted workouts after listening to Bob Seebehor,
Yeah.
2009, and thinking, I totally agree with him because I was on the same page. But then I took it too far. I think I was doing literally a pitcher of bulletproof coffee. I was training 20 hours a week, and I was probably not eating enough. I was doing low carb, high fat, but I'm stressing to everyone and saying this at KetoCon when I'm speaking about how to train the low carb athlete is, when is it too much? Like, when is, we keep thinking more is better, more is more. And when is it that Goldilocks effect of too much, too little, too much, and where is the right amount for you as an individual? Because I did all that and it broke me, and I still kind of play with fasting. Like, oh my gosh, is this fasting actually making me gain weight because my body's so sensitive to stressors, or is it benefiting me? And I said this at podcast the other day, that I feel like I'm cheating if I eat before a long run. I feel like we get so type A and like, oh, I can run. And I read this in all those pages or posts that people, they brag that I could do a 50-mile race fasted. And I went next day and I rode 30 miles on my bike and I felt awesome. I'm like, okay, but is that good for you? I mean,
That's right.
It's so mentally hard because you think, oh, I can do this fasted and I kicked ass, but, and when should I, stop that? And when is it causing more stress to your body?
Yeah. And I hear you, Debbie. I've been there too. Like, oh, I have to prove for my Ironman race that I could get by with, 92 calories an hour or whatever. And that was just like that's still, something more than zero, right? And I'm like, ooh, look how low I could go. But that's so short-sighted and, just so pigeonholed thinking. And this is what, like, no one wants to hear this, but we're, trying to just spread this education to female athletes. Like, yeah, you can do, your long trail race or your Ironman on air. Okay. But what are you looking for long term? Long term meaning like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, or 5-10 years from now. And that's where, Stacy, Dr. Stims talks about, that chronic stress on the body and the role of the thyroid and other players in the endocrine system, that there will be health effects. And that's different for everyone, right? So maybe you would be a lucky one, but as you've seen and experienced, and I've felt some of it too in some of my background, like health holes are being dug and it's hard to come back out of it. It can be years, just like you can speak to that very well, unfortunately.
Sadly, I get really passionate and angry at the same time. Like,
I know, me too. It's like, how do you sell this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's not sexy to say, oh, actually, it's not cool to be running for 8 hours. I saw this morning. Someone posted, ridiculous stuff and everyone's applauding her.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh, but
I think I read that too. It's like, I'm not going to say anything.
I think, you saw the one I did.
50 miles fasted, is that a good thing to do? And people do applaud. It's like, I remember when you lose weight and people go, oh, you look great. But you don't say that I was totally not eating for a month, or, I was people that have eating disorder and they're throwing up after every meal. So it's a fine line of our society of, we want to look good, but you want to look good, feel good, and move great, but on the inside as well as out. And I think this is why I became an FDN practitioner, because we have to do the lab testing and spend that money. And most people are like, oh, I don't want to spend money, but it's, essential. If you're going to tax your body this much, I think we need to know if we're working on improving performance and speeding up the aging process, or are you improving the aging process? I want to have a long, healthy life, not like be crippled.
Right.
is what I
I think, yeah, I'm with you, Debbie. One thing I wanted to add, just in follow up to your thought or question about women who want to lose weight, and let's say we're still talking about, the menstruating woman, not the post-menopause or menopause woman. One of the things I really resonated with from Dr. Sim's course, and I think even in the book, although that book is now 4 or 5 years old, so there's some new stuff that she has to say. But for those of us who do want body composition changes, a few things. One is, work with your physiology, change your training plan and programming away from that 3 weeks on, 1 week off, and adapt it to your
2
cycle.
weeks, maybe 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
Something like that. And the other thing is, nutritionally, this goes to a comment you just made a minute ago. If we want to be strong, fast, fit female athletes, and we want to change body comp, the time to diet is not around our workouts. It's later on in the day. So fuel well for your workout, and that can be still something that's individual, as we were talking about before we got on the recording, but fuel for your workout and hydrate, of course, but recover well nutritionally from your workout. And then you've got the whole rest of the day to pay attention to your nutrition. Not that we want everyone dieting, but I mean, you've got, the other numerous hours of the day to kick butt with whole foods and quality nutrition. But we need those training adaptations. So why sacrifice the training in lieu of just trying to stimulate, a higher fat oxidation rate that doesn't really correlate to body fat loss, if that makes sense?
So if we want to increase our fat oxidation rates, you say that you need to eat something beforehand versus not eating something.
So you can't, women can certainly increase fat oxidation rates, but does that mean that you are getting the training adaptation, right, from the muscle perspective? We can still do very well on that. And I'm sure that you will get comments, or I will, like, that's BS, I can already think of a couple people who would argue this point. But if we're putting our training properly around our menstrual cycle, and we're eating still, we can call it a metabolically efficient meal beforehand, which is, it doesn't have to be a 600 calorie thing or a fat bomb thing. We've got some protein and like smart carbohydrate, strategic carb, whatever. We're going to get more out of that training session than not. And I should caveat this, like if it's a 30-minute spin out on the bike, or just like, a super easy short run, I don't think, this is maybe where I differ from Dr. Sims, I don't think we have to fuel for those super short early morning things, but definitely for those key workouts.
So more the longer ones.
Longer and the higher intensity.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I find, I know other people have said this, but I do better not eating because it comes back up if I'm going to go work out. So I feel better just having a little coffee with heavy cream and some water. And I've been we'll talk next. I want to get into the catabolic and the protein synthesis and aminos and when we take those, because I've been trying to do that a lot more.
Oh, good.
But, my point is that doing UCAN or Vespa is something I would experiment with if I was going longer. But if I can't eat real food and I don't feel like I need it, if I'm just doing, an hour workout or lifting weights, it's not as like CrossFit as she does. Dr. Sims is a big CrossFit person, I gather, but I feel myself, I don't need to fuel that much in the afternoons. I have been experimenting doing, all right, if I work out, lift weights, say at 5:30 in the morning and I'm swimming at noon, when to, time when I eat, if it's having a little Vespa right before I swim. But if my swimming is low heart rate, I don't really need anything, but then I haven't eaten for so many hours. So maybe that improves your performance. So you have to just like dial in your carb timing and fueling. If it's low heart rate or higher intensity, it gets complicated. But I think that's where point is, it's bio individual, and you have to go, how do I feel? Do I feel like that workout was, like I said this in the intro, was I feeling tired and lethargic? And not be afraid to have something. So I think all of our groups of people, the fat adapted people, are like afraid of carbs, and reading all this stuff about just keto, and then all these people doing carnivore, that we don't really individualize, like, does that work for me or not work for me, and is it helping me, or do I feel worse? Because I keep reading people saying, maybe because I pay attention to this, I feel crappy and it's not working for me, and I've been doing this for a month and I feel like my workouts are getting worse and I'm not sleeping and all this stuff. It's like, hello, those are red flags. You need to take into account. So anyways, any thoughts on that? Then we'll move to the fueling for what happens peri-menopause and menopausal.
I think the thing is just recognizing not everything we can feel, right? Like, I don't wake up and go, ooh, I feel catabolic, I better eat it's like, and so there are other things that she highlights that have been shown in the research, like appetite hormones can change when we start getting menstrual dysfunction. And so that's not something like, I don't feel hungry, and gosh, I'm doing so well on this fasted thing, I must be super fat burner. But I mean, sometimes there are signs that we can't pick up on subjectively or, cognitively, that there's, things going downhill in the body. So I think my point there is just that we need to be careful with the things that we can't necessarily feel, because there are a number of those things happening. I'm not being very scientific in what I'm saying, but just that's my nervous Nelly,
But there is no scientific, that's what metabolic typing is all about, that I have spoken recently about in my show, that if you ever take the metabolic typing quiz, it asks you all these random questions, like, your eyes and your nose, and your face and your skin, and energy levels and all this different stuff, but it's really individualizing. And then I like taking that, take people into DNA Fit, upload their genetic raw data and put it into there. And then I do the MRT food sensitivity lab, and let's look at what foods you're allergic to. Because I had a client that her big red flag items were turmeric and turkey and cauliflower. So, you don't know, again, unless you do some individualized testing. But I will add that I've read this great article Allie Miller wrote on keto for women, and I was talking about it before, but just the whole, cycling in and out those carbs and how it goes with your hormone phases. She talked a little bit about, and how you might want to refeed, as you're saying, more carbohydrates during a high hormone phase or low hormone phase, but how you can add, listen to your body. But this leptin sensitivity, where leptin is that satiety hormone and ghrelin is a hormone that makes you feel full and satisfied. So a lot of that goes with all this. And my last thought was on all this is just kind of chronic stressors that she was talking about. If it's like icing on the cake, if you're doing really low carbs, I know a lot of people, athletes, are doing 20, 50 grams carbs a day and still feel good, but then they're, maybe they're doing intermittent fasting more than 16 hours longer. They're doing the fasted workouts. They have a stressful life. They, are crazy. And so then if you do intermittent, she said, like cold therapy, and you're doing the sauna and you're doing all the other things, is like, how much is too much? As I said earlier, like, we're so competitive and type A personalities, we get stuck in that more is better. Give me more and more. I'm going to follow all these things that I keep reading about, improve my mitochondria function. I'm going to take this and that. And anyways, I think it's just, we need to realize the chronic stress part can accumulate and cause the hormone imbalance, is what I take it, what you're saying and what Dr. Sims is saying, that it's all the hormones that we need to keep in balance and how those fluctuate with our hormone cycle, low hormone phase and the high hormone phase, and your training and your eating. You have to work on all that. So
yes.
take it
And
away, Dina.
no,
I'll
just
talk forever.
underneath all of that is just, the fact that the whole keto for women is one thing, but keto for athletic women, right? We've got maybe different tiers of that, I think if you're 30 years old and you are a high performing athlete, I honestly am not a fan of keto for that woman. But someone who's 55, 60, who's recreational, you know, uh, and maybe has some metabolic dysfunction or metabolic syndrome and things like that, then I think there's a time and a place for lower carb, maybe not keto, but just cycling in, like in the off season or early base season, doing a little bit of that lower carb part, but being really smart and specific and strategic and looking at, like you just said, that whole picture of sleep and stress and the good stressors, the not so good stressors, and that whole big picture. Because even if we're in post-menopause, we're not immune to health issues, to health, consequences. Anyway, I'll pause there. What was
Well,
next, Debbie?
I forgot what I was just gonna say, but I think it's looking at the main goal, as you and I did metabolic efficiency testing. What's the main goal? To burn fat, improve performance and longevity. But if you're trying to eat to burn fat, you want to be fat adapted. So the macronutrients that your body needs to burn fat, I always say, think of it like balancing your blood sugar out so you avoid insulin surges. So how many carbs, protein, fat you need to keep your blood sugar in check, to me that will say I'm burning fat. And so, whatever you want to call it, keto, low carb, high fat, primal paleo, I always say the main goal is to burn fat. We shouldn't be burning carbs as our main fuel source. And we should be metabolically flexible, that we're fat burners, but we can switch to burn carbs when needed and then flip the switch and go back to burning fat. Agreed? No?
Yeah, but I think this is where, and maybe you'll have Dr. Sims on your show at some point, but I think she would say, you know what, burning more fat, it really doesn't serve the female athlete as well as we think. Like, what is that doing? It's not making us faster, just burning more fat. We haven't seen that yet in any research. Maybe we have our N of 1 and there are other little inputs like, well, I have less GI distress now that I'm a better fat burner. So I'm not having my porta potty stop. So I've saved, 6 minutes. So I'm faster because of that. So, I think there are nuances and little pieces we could argue there. But I think overall, based on the research and things she presented, like fat being a better fat burner or metabolically efficient is a piece of it, but it's like not the focus female athletes should have. I don't know if I'm saying that very well.
No, I think it's interesting because I know I've been questioning our recommendations for people that have low thyroid, HPA axis dysfunction, cortisol, dysrhythmia, that they need to have a little carbohydrates at night sometimes to manage their cortisol. And I'm keep on going, okay, here's what I keep hearing from the keto carnivore people, that carbs are not essential. We don't need carbs. They're not necessary. But then you read these things like, well, if you have chronic stress and you have HPA axis dysregulation, or if you have hormone imbalances, then you do need some carbs. But then I'm like, well, why? These people are saying we don't need any carbohydrates. There's no essential carbs. There's essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, but there's no carbs. And gluconeogenesis converts protein into glucose, gluconeogenesis. So do we have to have carbs? And then,
right. I think, Debbie, that's where we have to hit our pause button. Like, okay, yeah, we can live without carbs. Okay, it's not an essential nutrient.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, we're talking about
Athletes.
a female athlete,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say before menopause, right? So, yeah, we can do okay, like we can subsist.
Yeah.
But I think what she's trying to say is we can kick more ass if we are. Oh, sorry. I hope I now
Bleep,
you have to
bleep.
put
I
the
don't think that's a
yeah.
swear word. That's fine.
But women actually can benefit more from those carbohydrates. And of course, I think even since the book was published, she's not saying any free for all carbs. There's still a
Yeah.
slant towards quality carbohydrates and
Like
putting them
tubers
in.
and root vegetables, she said.
Exactly. Yeah. So that training adaptation that we seek as female athletes can be, better pursued and achieved through smart placement of carbohydrates.
So anything else with that? Then I could talk, this like topic in itself is an hour or 3.
I
So
know, 3
you should come
days.
to KetoCon with me and speak on the low carb athlete, my presentation,
Ooh,
because
I would love to.
I have to figure out how to narrow it down because there's just so much to talk about, but there's not research. I can't really find science. I need to find the science to show that it's like, okay, you can't go totally fasted for everyone. So anyways, I want to talk about protein because she talks a lot about in her book about the need to load with branched chain amino acids, specifically leucine, 30 minutes before a workout, 30 minutes post-workout. Men can tolerate having their extra refeed of protein 2 hours afterwards, but women have this window when they're be able to resynthesize or protein synthesis and get the aminos into the muscles. And then she says later in the day, then at nighttime, and how is menopausal even more important to have more protein, and how we're less tolerant to fruit and carbohydrates. So even more as I think we get older, as you kind of mentioned earlier, we can be more low carb the older we get, is what my interpretation is, and we need more protein than most females take. So maybe the carnivores have something if you want to eat liver and heart and kidneys.
Well, and I think the other part of that as we get older in our menopause and post-menopause is that stimulus, not just through food, right, but through proper movement and strength training. And, you really have to change. We can't, when we're menopause and beyond, we can't train the same way. Like if we're doing long distance running, long distance cycling, and we didn't do strength work when we were 30 or 35, you have to put that in to help bone density, to prevent or minimize, that rate of sarcopenia that's just typical, right, with the aging process. So as female athletes and the aging female athlete, that now it is 40 grams of protein if we're talking about food post-exercise when we're in menopause, post-menopause. And it is in that tighter window. So that is a difference between men and women. On top of proper training program design. So like she appreciates that a lot of us still want to do our long runs, our long rides, or, some of our endurance stuff, but that's 1 or 2 days a week. And the rest of it is honoring, heavy lifting and adequate recovery between lifting, so that we can age well and age strong and still be lean and mean.
I think that has a lot to do also with not just the protein synthesis, but the hormones. As we get older, lower estrogen, they lower DHA, and that's going to be, a lot of people have chronic stress and the cortisol issues and have all these hormone imbalances. That's why I'm just doing my Dutch test actually tonight. I got to remember that. But the Dutch test is you do at 5 o'clock.
I did one of those.
Drink water. I have to take it tonight 5 different times to measure hormones. But women, I think, as we don't think as endurance athletes as imbalance of anabolic to catabolic, and how important it is to have more of that protein and lift more weights. And I did a podcast the other day. It's like, you got to go do your strength training and not just do this long cardio too.
Exactly.
It's a lot of people are doing it, I think, to lose weight and to be healthier, as well as people training for events. But you're in Boulder area and you're the mecca of endurance athletes in the outdoor world. What do you find is the area of opportunity and recommendations for the endurance athlete to improve what they eat?
I mean, I think the protein is that opportunity, especially for women. I don't know about you, Debbie, but a lot of the women I work with, that is one of the most opportune areas of nutrition to, I think, easily affect. I mean, it is more challenging with vegan female athletes, but we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of the areas I see is just deficient, let alone micronutrients and all that jazz. But the protein piece for body comp, for bone health, for immune system health, for satiety, all these beautiful things of our existence, is the thing I see. If this is what you're asking, like as far as opportunity in nutrition, it's one of the areas I see that I can most have that quick impact, and athletes feel it pretty quickly.
Yeah, and she says more of the leucine helps increase protein synthesis more, and whey protein is more anabolic and anti-inflammatory, and how like soy is not a good option. And it's interesting, like how I didn't watch Game Changers and I don't really want to, but how does the vegan thing for athletes make any sense when you read all this information and you need all that protein, not soy, you got to weigh. So if you're avoiding all dairy or animal products, it's quite a challenge, I would think, to get enough 40 grams of protein in. That's a lot. So it's 40. So let's go into menopausal women, because there's a lot, we talk about how to lift more weights as you get older, and how do things change from premenopausal to post-menopausal for women? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that is that protein piece, here I am, broken record, but that protein recommendation for women going into menopause, post-menopause, post-workout. And I don't, again, like, well, what workout? So this is more your strength, that high intensity or long training. But we're just looking to really maximize what we're seeking from that training session. So that protein piece is key. I think also keeping in mind this whole fasting thing, like, not so much. Nutritionally, then the other thing, as you know, Debbie, our sensitivity to carbohydrate changes, insulin sensitivity changes as we age. So that speaks to what you mentioned a few minutes ago is, if we eat whatever grams of carbohydrate, let's say 200 grams of carbohydrate, which might seem like a lot for some people listening, but making sure the majority come from, your vegetables, maybe some fruit, or putting it post-workout when our muscle tissue is more insulin sensitive. But really watching those added sugars, watching the engineered sports nutrition, meaning doing less of that, and trying to do more whole food, real, quote unquote, real food fueling as we're able, digestively anyways. And that's just helping that whole propensity to gain midsection belly fat, if we can change carbohydrate type and be aware of that whole issue.
With fructose, though, having fruit, and you're less, as we get older, we're less sensitive or more sensitive to fructose. And then fructose isn't digested or absorbed, or what's the word, used by, the carbs from fructose aren't used by muscle, right? They're processed in the liver. And what do you know on fructose? Because I find this interesting that it's like forever we're said to eat fruit, but it doesn't, your muscles don't use that energy.
Well, and are you talking about what she mentions in the book with fructose
Yes.
malabsorption and
Yes.
stuff? I know some of that is actually during exercise that she's referring to,
Okay.
that we lack the same ability as men do to absorb the same amount of fructose. So that's like a GI distress issue during exercise that I think she's talking about more. Because I think, yeah, maybe what you're speaking to as well is just the whole like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease from too much fructose in the diet.
Yeah.
That's also a thing, but that might be more of a health issue at any age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that interesting. So we're running out of time. The last few minutes, I know there's so many different topics. We knew this was going to happen though, but what other things on our list that you think we should bring up? So
Gosh, let's see here. I know there's a lot to this whole female
talked about fasting, keto,
feeling.
training, nutrition.
I suppose the hydration we didn't talk too much about, but that's just something that's a little unique with women. As we age, our thirst sensation changes.
Yeah. Oh, here. I found my notes on that. So that was
Okay.
more the high hormone phase. As progesterone's higher, it elevates the core temperature. Lower blood volume equals it's harder to sweat and cool yourself. And so we shed more sodium, increases risk for heat stress and hyponatremia, which is danger of low blood sodium. So she talks about pre-hydrating, especially in hot weather, and preloading with sodium or like a broth, or she suggests Osmo, which she founded, I read, or the right stuff, or you can make your own.
Yeah, so I think I don't know how well this is known among female athletes, but that importance of using, whether it is through broth, soup, or salty soup, or salting your foods, or using a functional hydration drink, that actually has benefits from a thermoregulation standpoint, cardiovascular function, the whole increasing plasma volume and the cooling ability of the body. And that's something that maybe, women need to play around with a little more when you are training and racing in hot, humid conditions. Of course, I think playing around is not really the right word, because we want to be purposeful and intentional with that. If we know we've got, we live in a hot, humid area, or we're going to be racing like in Kona or somewhere else, hot and humid. That's stuff that we can work on well in advance to make sure that we're preventing hyponatremia, and just, hydration ties well to performance. So we want to make sure that aspect is well fine-tuned in advance.
Yeah, so you guys can get the book Roar. It has a section. I wrote different pages as I probably make too much noise here, but sweating, jet lag, your mood, hydration, GI issues, had tips on the fructose fasted workouts we talked about, but it's all this stuff. There's a lot of information. Hopefully she'll write a second edition and update what she's found differently. But the recovery and overtraining, I'll talk more with Erin, because I think that's a big part. Overtraining is huge in our industry, in our endurance athlete world, but going too low carb, how that can elevate stress hormones and low growth hormone and systemic inflammation and your moods. And I think a lot of it is just paying attention, as we keep saying, and looking at your red flags. So
yeah, that's it. Just do that.
So talk about where people can find you and what your services are, and we can put all the links in the show notes.
Oh, thanks, Debbie. Yeah, Nutrition Mechanic is my name and my website, nutritionmechanic.com. And I do, nutrition consulting with athletes all over the country via phone and video calls and so forth. And I do offer a few testing services, but all that's on my website. Yeah, so that's a little snippet of me.
Are you speaking anywhere this year?
I've got a few things, Debbie. Like my next thing is in Boston in March at the Race Mania Expo thingy. I'm doing a few talks there. And
you were there last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it'd be fun to team up with you and do
Yeah.
a
You
few.
and I and Aaron, we should have business together.
Be
We all do
fun.
different things.
Different angles. Yeah.
That's great. Well, good. Thank you for your information, and hopefully we didn't confuse people too much, but I think it always ends up saying, as Brock and I used to say, it depends, and
It
N equals
depends.
1. Bio-individuality we agree on, and experimenting and listening to your red flags and making those micro adjustments based on your energy. Do you feel good? Do you feel happy? Is your workout faster, more productive and speedy recovery, and all this stuff? You can just kind of pay attention. But I think Training Peaks or some type of training program and track your cycle and tweak your workouts and nutrition program based on those 2 weeks apart, low hormone and high hormone phase. But definitely get our book, and we're just reviewing our thoughts on it. But you need to buy Roar, Dr. Stacy Sims' book, and get it from her. This is just our 2 cents, but I love chatting with you. Definitely need to do this more often, not every 2 years.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for having me on the show. It was awesome to chat with you.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.